Hello and welcome. Today we are building a basic REST API with Node and Express. Let's get started. Today we're building a REST API, that is a RESTful web service powered by Node and Express. I've got some acronyms and terminology linked here for REST, which is Representational State Transfer, API, Application Programming Interface, HTTP methods and verbs, HTTP response status codes, and even a discussion of CRUD, which is create, read, update, and delete. These links will all be here, and this is part of the project. It's actually the index page that will give all the details for the API, and this is linked to in my GitHub, and you can launch it from there directly to glitch.com, which will launch the project. So this page is essentially for you to refer to afterwards. Here's all the details of the API, and we'll use this kind of as a guide as we create these different paths where we can request data from the API with these different methods. And we'll come back and refer to this some. And we'll also use these different accept parameters. So let's get started. We're going to use node.js. And that's available at node.js.org, and you can download the latest version. And we're going to use Express, which you don't need to do that. We're going to install that with npm, as they show here, and npm installs with Node. So Express is the framework. Node.js, JavaScript is what JS means, of course. That's the language. And let's get to Visual Studio Code, and we will start in on the project. Okay, if you don't have Node installed already from that website, nodejs.org, please install Node, pause the video, and then come back. What we're going to do in Visual Studio Code is open a new terminal window. You can do that with Control, Shift, and the back tick, or just choose New Terminal from the terminal menu. I'm going to stretch this up so it leaves a little more room. After you have Node installed, you can type node-v to see what version of Node you have. And then with Node installed, you'll have access to npm, which is Node Package Manager. And we're going to type npm init and then -y. And the -y flag will prevent it from asking us all the questions as it fires off. So here we go. And with that, we now have a package.json file, and I'll click on that. And we've got a small description of our application here. And it says REST API Basics. It lists main as index.js, but we don't really have to use that as our main if we don't want to. And what we're going to do is start off with an app.js file. So over here in the root directory, I'll just create one file and I'll call it, well, I said app.js, let's call it server.js. You'll see different versions. Some people call it app.js. Some people leave it as index.js. Some people name it server.js. And that's what we'll do today. Okay, from there, we're going to need to install some dependencies. And so let's go ahead and highlight the package.json once again. We don't see any dependencies listed here right now, but we will as soon as we add them. So what we're going to do is npm and then I, which stands for install, and then we're going to add Express, and we're going to add cores, and then press enter. And these dependencies will be added to our project. And with that finished, now you can see we have a dependencies section in our package.json, and it lists cores and Express, and we need both of those. We're also going to add one dev dependency that we'll use as we're developing the API. So here we'll type npm I and then node-mon, M-O-N, and then dash capital D, which will stand for save dev, or it's a dev dependency. I'll press enter. And now you can see we have a dev dependency in our package.json, and that is node-mon. So the other thing we need to change is our script section, and we can get rid of the test script, and we will add a couple. We'll add a start script, and here we'll have node, and then we'll have server.js, so it launches our server app, and then we'll also have dev, and here we'll use node-mon, and then we'll type server.js. And you can save that. And now when we use node-mon, this is much like using live server, the live server extension, when we're developing a front-end application. As we make changes and save, node-mon will automatically reload our application for us. Okay, let's go back to server.js. And now at the top of the server.js, let's type const express, and we'll set that equal to require, and we will require the express package that we added. And then we'll have const cores, and we'll set that equal to require cores. And then we're going to define our app and set that equal to express. Then we're also going to define a port, and we'll capitalize this because it's truly a constant. We'll set that to process.env.port and then or 3000. And now this would be at the bottom of our file, and we'll put things in between these definitions and what I'm about to type. But we will type app.listen, and then after that we'll have parentheses, and we will add the port, and then we'll have an anonymous function, and then it will have a console.log, and we'll have listening on, and now this is a template literal. We'll put the port in so we know what port we're listening on. And after that, we just put our semicolon, and we can save. And now in the console, if we type npm run dev, this will be our node console. And now we see listening on 3000. So our application is already running and listening on port 3000. So if we were to go to localhost 3000, we should see our application. Let's go ahead and do that, and we will probably have a blank page, but we can just verify that our application is running. We have localhost, and then we put port 3000, press enter, and we cannot get because we do not have a route set up. But yes, overall a blank page. So very shortly we will set up a route for our index page. All right, let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And after we've set up our port, we need to set up a little bit of middleware with Express, and this will tell our app to use cores. And what cores is cross-origin resource sharing. And you can put in options that will make it specific to your application or specific to an IP address or URL. But right now we're creating a REST API that should be open for all. So along with that, we need to add some options that will pass a pre-flight check. Now, a form submission would not require a pre-flight check. However, any type of JSON request would. That is considered a complex request. So we start off with app.options, and then we have an anonymous function, and in Express that'll have a request, a response, and a next. And this is an arrow function. Now inside the body of this app.options, we'll have a response.header, and here the first one we'll put is access, control, allow, origin. Oops, I need a quote there, and then the colon, and then we put in the asterisk, and that's essentially allowing all origins instead of just a specific web address. When I said colon, that needs to be a comma. There we go. After that, our next header will be access-control-allow methods, and this is saying which HTTP methods we will allow. And we're going to allow get, and then we put a comma, put, post, and options. And this is really just going in the response to the pre-flight check to say which ones we're allowing. And so that gets sent back. Of course, there are others such as delete, patch, head, and so on. Okay, from there, one more header. And this is access-control-allow-headers. And there are some default headers that are allowed, but we'll put in just a few that are not default. And we'll start with authorization. I'm not going to use that today, but I just wanted you to be aware that there were some headers that you would need to specifically put in. Another is content length, and then x-requested width. There we go. Those are some common ones that you see included that aren't in there by default. And I'll get the line to wrap by pressing Alt-Z. And then we have response.send, and we're sending a 200 response, which means okay, that is a good response. So that's what is needed by a browser like Chrome when it sends a pre-flight check to say, okay, we can send a JSON request. And speaking of cores, and I'll provide a link to this in the description as well, but at MDN Web Docs, there is a good discussion of cross-origin resource sharing and what it is all about if you're curious to learn more about that. Okay, back in the code. After we've provided that, we can go ahead and say app.use, and this is middleware again. And middleware is a function that applies to our routes, and we're telling the app to use this on all routes. We're not specifying any route in particular, any endpoint, which would be an address that you would request information from. So we're using JSON, and we're also going to use express.url encoded, and it accepts an option that is fairly common, and that is extended, and we'll set that to false. And that is referring to which query string library it uses to decode parameters with. And this URL encoded applies to form data that is submitted. So we need this for JSON requests, and we need this for form requests, is a good way to think of that. Okay, then we're going to create a logger. And this is also middleware, and I will show you how to do this with a anonymous function. But we could just create a function by name and then refer to it in here as well. But this is the anonymous function being inserted into app.use. And so it starts with the request, response, and next. And then we'll go ahead and console.log, and we'll start with a template literal. We're going to log the method that is sent, which like get or post. Then we're going to log the path that is requested or sent to. And then we're going to log the request IP if we get the IP to request or to log. There we go. And then we'll call next. And what next does, and it's right here as well, says, okay, I'm not finished with this route yet. Apply this, but don't stop. Go on and do everything else you're going to with the route. And that's what we need for that middleware. So let's go ahead and create our first route so we can see our logger in action. Of course, this applies to every request that comes in, and so then we'll see that log down here in our terminal, which is our console window in Node. So our first route is just the index route, and so we'll say app.get, and we put in the slash, so it's the default route for the address, and we'll have a request and a response. Now inside of this we'll say response.sendFile, and now I'm going to use dir name, which stands for directory name. It's an environment variable in Node, and it will provide the directory name. So depending on which file you put it in, you could have a different response. And then I'm going to concatenate that just with the plus symbol here, and then provide views, which will create a views folder. Then I'll put in index.html. And so when we request this default route, the index.html in the views folder should be served. Let's go ahead and quickly create that views folder. And inside of the views folder, we'll create the index.html. And now I'm just going to paste in what I have. And this is what you saw at the beginning of the tutorial, the actual page with the table full of routes that explains everything the API should do. So I will save that. And now let's go back to the browser, and where we previously had an error here, let's reload. And now we have our HTML page. And so that is our first route. And if we go back to our code and we look at the terminal, we can see our request logger logged the get method, and then it logged the path, which was just a slash. And then as far as the IP address, well, it didn't have much to provide there for us because it's just here on the local host. Let's jump back into the server file again. And after this first one where we provided the index, I'm just going to copy this, and we won't have to change much, but it will be the form route. And so now instead of the index file, I'm going to serve the form.html, and we'll save that. And then in the views folder, I'll create form.html, and I'm just going to paste it in as well. And I'll save this, but our form needs a CSS file. So I will show you how to set a static path to that. As you see, I'm linking to just /form-style.css. Back in the server, and we'll link to this above our get path for the form and for our home page. But we will just put in app.use, so once again, middleware, express.static, and now I'll create a couple of static folders. One be a public repository. Let's say we had some PDFs or anything we just wanted to make available to the public. But we can create more than one static directory. So I'll also say app.use, express.static, and now inside of this one, I'll put CSS, and we can save both of these. Now, what will happen is Express will just look at these in the order they're provided. So public takes precedence over CSS, but if the file we're looking for is not in public, then it will look in the CSS folder. So let's go ahead and create both of those folders. I'm not even going to put anything in public, just imagine there would be a CSV or a PDF or something that somebody would want there. So we have that static folder, but I mainly wanted to show you can have more than one static folder. So now we have our CSS folder, and inside the CSS file, I'll create this form-style.css. I'm just going to paste in what I have for CSS for the form, and we'll save that. And now back here in the server, we can see we've got both of these ready to go. And then in the form, we're just linking to /form-style.css. Notice I don't have to have two dots go up out of this folder into the CSS folder. It's just a static path as if it were already in the views directory. So we can just say /form-style.css. And if we go to the browser, I'll open one more page here. It'll be localhost port 3000/form. We now have our web form processor, and it allows us to submit with a GET request. It also allows us to submit with a POST request. And of course, this form will be part of the repository if you want to look at the HTML for that. It also has a reset button. So we can submit both GET and POST requests, just first name and last name here. So we need to create routes to handle that as well. Back in Visual Studio Code, what I want to do first is let's back in the server file. Before we handle that first name, last name form, we've added a couple of routes here directly to our server.js. And that is not always the way this works, but I want to add one more just to show you how to put a parameter in the path name before we move on to the rest. So let's say app.get, and now this would be / and then we put the parameter, and notice how it starts with a colon, and this is just a word parameter is what I'm putting in, and then echo, which is part of the path. And then after that we'll have our request, response, and now we'll decide what to send back. Now, instead of the send file, we'll have a response that's in JSON. And now our JSON will start with echo, so we're echoing something, and we're going to echo the params, and then it's word, and that is what we had right here. So this is the request body. Well, it's not the body, it's the params, but it's the request, and then we're getting the params from the request, and then that param that we want specifically is word, and so we're able to put that right here. You could have more than one parameter in here. And so this will echo what we send to it in the URL, and it will reply that echo with JSON. So we can test that out And we could even test that out in the browser because it's a GET request. So let's just go ahead and do that. Let's go back to the browser one time. And let's open this one more tab, and we'll just say localhost, and then we'll say 3000, and then we'll have whatever word we want, say cheese/echo, and we'll press enter, and we get back this small JSON response here in the browser that says echo cheese. Now in the API page that I created at the bottom where it says testing, it links to Postman. So I'll click this real quick. If you go to the Postman site, postman.com, you can download this software to test APIs with. And so you can go ahead and do that and follow along with me. I'm going to close this out once again, and I'm going to pull Postman up. Notice I already have in a new request, and I'm at localhost 3000. It's a GET request. And I'm not going to send any specific parameters here, but I do want to go ahead and specify that same URL that we had before. So we'll say cheese and then /echo. And now over here I can just click send, and the response will come up down here. And there is our echo cheese in JSON. Now back in the code, before we provide any other routes or get anything that's more complicated, let's go ahead and add one catch-all route that we would do at the very end after all the other routes. And we'll say app all, because we wouldn't want this to catch the other routes that we actually want to guide somewhere else. But this will request and response, and this is to everything essentially that hasn't come before it, is what this is referring to. And if you put it before the other routes, then this would take over instead of what we had here. So you want this at the end, and we're just going to have a response.send, and we're going to send text that says invalid route. And then we can save that file. Now let's go ahead and go back to Postman, get used to using that, and let's just request whatever. And now we get an invalid route response. Okay, let's jump back to Visual Studio Code one more time. And now, above the routes that we have defined, but below, let's say below these static directories we've defined, let's go ahead and add a new time routes. And let's say equals require /routes/time. And we haven't created that yet, but we will. And then we'll use app.use. We'll say routes/time. And then we'll pass in time routes. So what we're going to need to do is create a folder over here. We can minimize anything there that's expanded. Create a new folder called routes. And inside of routes, we'll create time.js. In time.js, we once again need express. So we'll have const express equals require express. And after that, this will be a little different. We're going to define router and have this equal to express.router with a capital R and the operators afterwards. Now we can define a route here that says router.get, and we just get essentially the default page. This could have more than one path in this file, but right now we only need that default path. And then we'll say request, response, and next again. And now from the request, we're going to add the property time and set that equal to the new date and then toString, and then call next. And now we could set a second route that looks just like this. However, you can also chain these functions with a comma and then have another request, response, and here's the function, and we'll say a response.json that provides the time, and then we'll put in the request time that we defined before, and we should be able to save this now. But there's something else we still need here, and this is module.exports equals router. So we need to export this because we import it in our server with what we did over here. So we'll save this, and you can see here's the import, and then we're using time routes when anybody requests this path. So even though this is named time.js and it goes there, you can just request it by saying time at the end without the JS, and then it will have its own default route as we saw here. But it could have other routes like a /about or anything else you wanted to put there as well, a / whatever. So we're following this route. Let's go ahead and test it out. And we'll put in our routes /time in Postman and send. Well, that didn't work out. Let's go back to the code and see what I did wrong. Oh, we don't want that parentheses there. We would want that here. You don't want that until you close the full path out. So this was just function, comma, another function, and then we close that here. Let's save that, go back to Postman, and try that one more time. There we go. Of course, we got not just the time, but the full value of the date object as we sent it just to string from the date. Okay, let's go back to our code again, and let's add another route in the server. Now it's time to add our name routes that will work with our forms. We'll say name routes equals require. We'll pass in routes /name. And let's go ahead and leave that space between there. And then we'll say app.use. And we'll have, once again, start with the / routes /name. After that, we'll have name routes. And now over in our routes, we need to create name.js. Once again, at the top, we're going to have express and router. I'll save that. And then after that, we'll have router.route. And then we'll put in a /. Now notice this isn't get or post. This will actually grab any method, and then we can chain those methods, and I'll put them underneath so it's a little easier to read. And I'll put get, and then we'll also chain post, and we're going to put in a function for these. So now let's define our function. Our function is going to be called name reply, and that will have the request and the response. And so now we can put name reply in the get and the post. And now inside the function, the first thing we'll do is define the method, and this will be equal to the request.method. And now we're going to use some ternaries to get our information, because a get and post request has a little bit of a different way of getting the parameters. So we'll define first name, and we'll set that equal to the method. If it is equal to a get request, then first name will be equal to request.query.first, as that's how we would get that from a get request. But if it's not equal to get, which means it should be a post request, it will be equal to request.body.first. And then we need to do the same thing with the last name. So that will also be equal to method, and if that equals get, it will be equal to request.query.last or request.body.last. Okay, now that we have figured that out as far as which would be get and which would be post, we can use the same function for both methods that way. We can go ahead and provide a reply based on the accept headers. And that is when the request is sent from the front end, from the client, the browser, and it says, I will accept JSON in return, or I will accept text in return. And we'll see if the API, of course, you want to, as a front-end developer, you want to send in a request that you know the API accepts. But this will see if the API accepts it and what it does for each different type of accept header that it receives. So we'll put res.format. Now inside this format, it's kind of like a switch case statement. So we'll say text plain, and then it will have an anonymous function. And inside this anonymous function, we'll have res.send, and then we're going to send a template literal. It says name, and then we'll pass in the first name, and we'll pass in the last name. And that's pretty much the end of that. But then we'll just have a comma after that function or option. And then we're going to have a text/HTML option. Again, an anonymous function. And we'll say let HTML equal, we'll put an unordered list to start out with. And then we'll have HTML plus equals, so HTML equals the unordered list plus this line. This will be li, and then it's going to be the name, first name, last name like we had up here. So I'll just copy this and paste it right here. And then I'll close that out. And we'll have one more line where HTML plus equals everything that it's equal to already, plus a little more, and that's just because we need to close out the unordered list. There we go. And then we're going to send, so res.send HTML. And so if the accept header comes in and says we want text HTML, and that's what a browser would do, it will send this HTML in return. Let me add a line there as well so it reads a little better. And then finally, we'll have an application JSON request, and this will be an anonymous function, and we'll send JSON in response. So it's res.json instead of res.send. And here we'll have the name, and after that we're going to have a template literal because it's just going to be one string. So we'll start here with the backtick and then paste in our two variables and close that out. And then we have a comma. That's what I forgot after this one is also a comma. And then what we'll have left is the default. Much like a switch case statement. And for the default, once again, an anonymous function. We'll say res.status, and this is a 406. And a 406 is basically saying the type of data you're requesting is not acceptable. And we'll save that. And I almost forgot we need the export at the bottom of this file as well. So module.exports equals router. Let's go ahead and bring this back and save. I think I'm missing one more little curly brace here, and save again. And we're all good. And notice how NodeMon restarted from the error that we had to it's back to running without any extra work. That's nice. Okay, so now our name routes should be working, and they should react to the accept header that we send with it. So HTML, of course, we'll send HTML back. Let's try that first. And we can do that in the browser by going to the form that we have as part of the project. And I'll just put in my name here. And if I submit this with this button, it's a GET request. And we get back a list item with my name. If I go back and I submit with this, it's a POST request. And the same function handles it. And it's a list item with my name. That's great. So now let's go to Postman. And we can make the same type of requests, but we can change some of what we're doing. And so we'll go ahead and add some parameters here. We're in the Params tab. So we've got a first name parameter. Set that equal to Dave. And we've got a last name parameter. Set that equal to Gray. And notice how with the GET request, it adds those directly to the URL. And go ahead and send. I'm not so sure I put those parameters in right. Let me check. Oh, it's just first and last, as we had request query first, request body first, and so on for last as well. So come back here and change those parameter names to first and last, and send again. And there we go, name Dave Gray. Okay, so if we switch this to post, then we won't be working with params in the URL like this. We need to go to the body. And in the body, we can say, okay, this is URL encoded form data, and now we can provide first, and I can say Dave, and then we can do last, and I can say yeah, just so it's something different. And we can send again. And we got Dave yeah in return for the post. So both of those are working. Now let's go ahead and change the data one more time. And let's say instead of this is accept all types now. So let's get rid of that header that Postman provides. And down here, let's say we're only going to accept text or text plain. There's it. And so now we can send that. And we got the same response. So now let's try a get, still text plain. And if we look at the params, let's add the params back in on the get. So they're in the URL. And we got the Dave Gray again from the get, and that's fine. Now let's go ahead and change this once again, and we will say application JSON. There it is in the drop menu. And we're going, well, we could go ahead and do the GET request first. I got not acceptable, so let's see what happened. Oh, it's ECMAScript. I didn't mean to have that. I thought I selected JSON. So we know our default works now. Here's the application JSON, and that's what we want. And now we got JSON in return. You can see how it breaks it into different lines here. Let's go ahead and do that with post as well. The body is still there, and it's still form data. That is fine. But we're saying we want to receive JSON in return. And we got Dave yeah in JSON. So that route is working as expected. So let's go back to the code and add just a couple of more routes before we're finished. And we can say server, there it is. Now after the name routes, let's go ahead and type const JSON routes. And we'll put in a require. This would be routes slash JSON. Not to be confused, you don't have to do this to work with JSON at all. I'm just naming this route JSON. After that, we'll do app.use. And here we'll put in routes slash JSON and then our JSON routes. And then I want to do one more while we're here, and this will be echo all routes. And this will be require routes slash echo dash all. And then underneath we'll have app.use, and we'll put in slash routes slash echo dash all, and we'll put in our echo all routes. Okay, so now we have these routes ready. We need to go ahead and create those files. So the first one should just be json.js. And the next one will be echo-all.js. Let's go to the json.js first, and we'll just have our express and router at the top again. And then we'll just say router.get. And we'll just put in a path for this default route and put a request and a response. Start our arrow function. We'll define our data, and our data is just going to be equal to hello JSON. And then we'll have a response. It's in JSON, and here we can say message, and the message will be our data that we have. And so this should give us a response in JSON that just says hello JSON. Module.exports equals router again. We'll save that. Now let's go ahead and put the basics into our echo all just so our app doesn't crash. And we'll paste in the top 2 lines with express and router. And I'll just grab this bottom line as well. Put this back in echo all and save. Looks like there's still a reason that the app won't start, so I must have typoed something. Yep, server's red. Let's go back and look at server. And my fingers were on the wrong keys before. Let's make that a const. And yep, everything's good again. So now we can check our JSON route. Let's go back to Postman. And we have routes/JSON. And this was for a GET request only, if I remember right. And application type, JSON should be fine as well. And we've got our hello JSON message. So the JSON route is working fine, which leaves us our last route, echo all. I'm going to minimize the open editors up here so we can see more of the file tree, and we'll highlight echo all. What this route is intended to do is echo all parameters it receives. It doesn't have any specific parameters it's going to receive. Just whatever parameter is sent to it, it will echo, or more than one. So let's go ahead and start with that, and we'll have router.route again, like we did with the name route. And now we'll attach the different methods that we accept. So there's get, and this will have an echo all function. Then we'll have post. We'll use the same function for it. And we're also going to accept a put request. And that's echo all. Okay, let's define our echo all function. I'd like to have at least one more line there. So there we go, function. And then we'll call this echo all. We'll have a request and a response. Now let's define our method. And it's the request.method. Then we'll define data. And this is once again going to be equal to a ternary based on the method, because we're using this for get, post, and put requests. And so we'll say if it's equal to get, then data is equal to the request.query. Else, and that would be if it's not equal to get, essentially, then it's equal to request.body. And request.body applies to both post and put requests. So this will work. And then we'll pull in the res.format that we previously did with the name route or name path as well. We'll say text/plain. And now an anonymous function. And then we're going to send the data. Put a comma there, and let's go ahead and put a space here. And then we'll have our HTML. So it would be text/HTML, an anonymous function. We'll have let HTML. It will be equal to, once again, an unordered list. And then we'll have HTML. Whoops, we will not have the HTML plus equals right away. We'll have a for loop for the key. Let's put this in parentheses, for key in data. Now we'll have our HTML plus equals, and we'll define our line item. And this will be equal to the key. And then we'll say data, and we'll provide the key here. And then afterwards we need to close out this line item. And that is the complete for in loop, and then we'll have our HTML plus equals, and we'll close out that unordered list. And then we'll send our HTML. Okay, we'll save that, and now we still need to handle the application JSON. That'll be our JSON response, and we'll just send the data. And then we should have a default. There we go. Arrow function, and this default will send a status. So once again, 406, if it's not text and it's not HTML and it's not a JSON accept header, then they're requesting a type of data that is not acceptable. And we'll save that. And we should be good to go for our route, but we still, oh, there's our module export. I almost thought we didn't add it. So we should be good to go for this echo all. So let's try this out with like a city, state, country or something like that. And we can try the different parameters here. So we've got get, and we've got routes, and then we'll say echo dash all. And after that, the first key in the param will say city, and here we'll say Kansas City. State, we'll say, let's do the 2-letter abbreviation, Kansas, and then we'll even say country, and we'll say US. Okay, this is the GET request going to echo all. And yes, we got the response that we expected to here in JSON, because I believe we're still have our accept JSON header right here. Okay, let's try a post request now. And in the body, instead of first and last, we'll put city, and here we'll put Miami, state, Florida, and once again, country, US. And we'll submit our post. And yes, we got it back in JSON as we expected. And now let's go ahead and also do a put request. And I'll send that again. And we got Miami back again. And that is what we expect. Let's change the headers just to make sure everything else is working. So if we send it in text plain, we've got plain text in return. And if we say text/HTML, we get our unordered list in return, and that is as expected. So let's revisit the browser, and if we come back to our initial page, our operations, we now have this index page, we have an operational form page, we have a route for the JSON that returns message data, we have a route for the time, which also returns the full date data right now. We have this route that accepts a parameter in the URL, and it echoes whatever word we put in there. We have this route that will take the first and last parameters in a get or a post, and it will return those to us. Oh, we did not add the get route for about in the names route, but that's the only one we left out so far. I'll make sure to put that in and have it in the repository so you can see how more than one route could be in one of these files. And then we have a get, post, and a put for the echo all, and whatever parameters we send to this route, it will echo all of those. So that is essentially a basic API. We did not tie it into a database. We just explored the different ways to route things with Node and Express, and that would be the next step. After you're comfortable with routing and knowing how to set up the different routes, then we would bring in a model and tie in a database, whether it's Mongo, SQL, any type of database you would think of. And we could do that in the next tutorial. So I appreciate you guys watching and subscribing, liking the video. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you soon.